Good evening, everyone. My name is Punya, and it is my pleasure, on behalf of the organizing committee of the Bhagat Singh Memorial Lecture, to welcome you all here today. It is indeed an honor to extend my warm welcome to the key speakers of the day, Dr. Chris Moffat, Comrade Hana Mullah. Bhagat Singh Memorial Lecture is an initiative taken by the students of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, to promote an intellectual and cultural engagement with the politics and legacy of Bhagat Singh. Through this event, we strive to imagine and work towards winning a world that, in Bhagat Singh's world, is filled with truth, beauty, and good, not only in contemplation but also in everyday life. The Bhagat Singh Memorial Lecture, which was initiated by the members of Progressive Students Forum in association with Students' Union of TIS and other like-minded students of TIS, continues to be one of the best academic events of TIS Mumbai. For the first BSML in 2018, we hosted Professor Chaman Lal and Professor Gopal Guru, who spoke on Bhagat Singh's inspiring life of study and the struggle for freedom. For the second BSML in 2020, we hosted P. Sainath and Dr. Shamsul Islam, who spoke on the idea of India. This year, in the midst of the tumult around us, the theme we have chosen as Bhagat Singh in post colonial India. We are happy that we have the best panel to speak on the theme. And as part of the event, we have conducted several pilot events, such as India Towards Inqilab, an event which included national level essay competition on the topic Nationalism and Democracy during the times of farmers' protest, national level photography competition on the topic Everyday People Struggle, along with which we have collaborated with Leftward's Book for a 7-day offer sale and an open mic event in which we had artists from various parts of the country who have used their art as a medium of dissent and raised pertinent questions on the existing socio-political realities. The winners of the national level competitions will be announced on our Facebook page after the event. So stay tuned with us. We're having the lecture and Zoom platform. Due to the overwhelming registrations and demands, we will be going live from 11 Facebook pages, including Bhagat Singh Memorial Lecture Facebook page. In the interactive session, we will primarily take questions from the registered Zoom participants, and if time allows us, we'll include questions posted in the live comment session. So please do share your questions for panelists in the comment section. So, without much delay, we extend our warm welcome and deepest gratitude to the honorable speakers, participants, and viewers. Allow me to welcome the chair for today's session, Comrade Ranjani Basu, who has completed PhD from School of Development Studies and is this former General Secretary of Progressive Students Forum, and who is currently works as agricultural policy researcher, focuses on the global south. Research includes agrarian land relations and peasant movements. Over to you, Ranjini.
Yeah, thanks, Punya. Yeah, as the role, as the chair, my role is very limited. I would just like to introduce the speakers, and I firstly want to congratulate the Progressive Students Forum for organizing this brilliant and wonderful panel on a very pertinent and issue. This edition of the BSML takes the legacy of critically introspecting the past while looking at the present forward. The third BSML comes at a very crucial juncture of India's agrarian trajectory. It's been 3 months since the farmers have been camping at the Delhi borders, protesting against the three farm laws, which stand for greater corporate capture of Indian agriculture. These protests have been unique in many sense. One of them is, of course, how historical figures have been revived to draw links between the anti-colonial struggle, and one such prominent figure has been Bhagat Singh himself. we have seen a heightened agrarian distress and a corresponding rise in organized peasant struggles in the period since 2014. The present protest against the farm laws is also a culmination of years of collective and united actions, which now have further expanded in their spread, giving it a mass character. So, taking this theme ahead, we have our first speaker, Comrade Hannan Molla, who would be speaking on Bhagat Singh and farmers' resistance then and now. He is currently working as the National General Secretary of All India Kisan Sabha. He's a senior leader and member of Working Committee of the All India Kisan Sangharsh Coordination Committee, and has played a pivotal role in bringing together farmer unions from different parts of the country. He has been playing a leading role in farmers' movement in India for more than 40 years now. He is one of the part of the 7-member coordination committee of the Sanyukt Kisan Morcha, which is spearheading the farm protest in Delhi. And also, he is also part of the delegation, which is representing the farmers' demands to the government. As our second speaker, we have Dr. Chris Moffat, who will be speaking on the topic of unfinished business, specters of Bhagat Singh in India. Dr. Chris is a lecturer in history at the Queen Mary University of London and a historian of modern South Asia with an interest in the shape and form of history's public life across the broader post-colonial world. As part of his PhD from University of Cambridge, he has researched and written extensively on Bhagat Singh, tracing his continuing political potential into the 21st century and asking what it means to take such figures seriously in the history of political thought. He has also authored a book titled India's Revolutionary Inheritance, Politics and the Promise of Bhagat Singh, which came out from Cambridge University Press in 2019. As part of this panel, there was also Arya Rajendran, who, due to unforeseen situation, could not join us, but she was supposed to speak on students, youth, and Bhagat Singh in contemporary India. As you all may know, that she is currently serving as the mayor of Trivandrum Municipal Corporation in Kerala, and she recently won the 2020 local body elections at the very young age of 21, and was appointed as the mayor of the corporation, making her the youngest mayor in the history of India. She is also the president of Bal Sangham, one of the world's largest children's organizations, with around 1 million members and 25,000 units. Under her leadership, the Bal Sangham was very much effective in organizing children from migrant worker families and worked as an alternative support group to the larger section of school students during pandemic period. It's a loss for us that we can't hear Arya today. I was also looking forward to this, but due to unforeseen situation, she's been unable to join us. But I've been told by our comrades in PSF that they'll try to arrange for a video recording of hers in the coming days. But for now, I would like to welcome Comrade Hannan Molla to speak. Each speaker would be getting about 30 minutes. And after the first round, we will take questions that will come to us on the question answer boxes, and also the links that have the Facebook links where this is being playing live. Okay, so Comrade Hannan. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chairperson and Mr. Moffat and viewers, friends. I thank the organizing committee for this very important discussion regarding the Bhagat Singh and his relevance in the post-colonial period. And in that, specific subject has been taken at the current Kisan movement. And as you know, the Bhagat Singh has a very, very small stint of life, 23 years. Many of us even start our life, and it was the end of it. But during this period, he left huge legacy for the next generation of the country. And his role is the greatest, one of the greatest revolutionary of our country, and inspiration of the younger generation for the posterity. So we about his different aspect of life, Mr. Moffat will speak as I am told. So with few words about his activity, then I'll focus on the Kisan movement and agrarian crisis in India. You know, Bhagat Singh, when he was only in school, in his school day, this most brutal attack on the freedom movement by the British government was there. The first Lahore conspiracy case, and then Kartar Singh Sarawa and others were hanged. And that incident in his younger days influenced his life. And since then, he used to keep the photograph of Saraba all through his life to keep his memory in mind. That is how he was influenced that. Then the Jallianwala Bagh mass killing also intensified the desire for ending the oppressive imperialist rule. And there is no looking back. We have his history, we have seen how he continuously joined the struggle. And in those days, you know, there is a stream of mm, movement, that is um, militant movement was there against British imperialism. There was Gandhian movement against British imperialism, and there was a class struggle developing against British imperialism. Bhagat Singh's who come from this first that movement stream, that is militant movement for the freedom against British imperialism, and he became the legendary hero of the freedom movement in his days. And he joined the revolutionary organization of his time in his younger age, that Hindustan Republican Association he joined. And after that, he built up the revolutionary youth organization, Punjab, and that is Naujawan Sabha, to organize the younger people in Punjab and different parts of the country. And these organizations were developed as a mass organization to recruit younger generation for HRSC, revolutionary struggle for that. So this organizational network, organizational platform also in from his younger days, he followed a very correct perspective to build up anti-imperialist struggle. And you know how those struggles are there. But now we know in after till independence, only he was not inspiration, but even post independence, New India, he remains the source of in our inspiration, because he fought, he showed the way to fight against imperialism. Today, we are also under the cloud of US imperialism. Our independence, our sovereignty are challenged by the imperialist forces, and in collaboration with the mm, bourgeois landlord classes who are ruling the country. So, anti-imperialist legacy is one of the major legacy that's still relevant. Then this exploitative society, and one exploitative society only have been replaced by another. After independence, we have seen this bourgeois landlord classes, exploitation of the workers, peasants, poorer section is intensifying, and now it is even fascistic attack on democratic rights are now under the NDA rule. Um, that is there. So because of that, the fight for protecting our democratic rights, our sovereignty, our human rights, all these things are also uh, very, very relevant today. And the new generation is also, it is very, very relevant for them to imbibe his idea, to fight against that, is fight and that uncompromised struggle against imperialism, his unflinching resistance to communalism. That is another challenge before our country still after independence. Now it is intensified after NDA rule. And unbending opposition to bourgeois landlord class rule. That is also the main source of exploitation of this country. That is new generation is suffering, and this because of unemployment, illiteracy, and all these difficulties younger generation facing. So that is also one area which Bhagat Singh will always inspire the younger generation to fight against. And at the same time, ideological moorings for fighting for social changes towards socialist system, and to understand that the studying of Marxism, all these things are there. So these legacy are very much important for our younger generation, and now is very much relevant. So because of that, you have selected details will be explained by Professor Moffat. But in this context, farmers movement, we are because all these reason I have explained, the basic that is reason for our agrarian crisis. India was an agrarian society. British imperialism made it more exploitative by the colonial exploitation and the feudal exploitation. And against that, farmers were continuously fighting against the feudal exploitation. And we have seen that this agriculture, because of this agrarian policy, post-independence agrarian policy, that failed to give proper solution to the agrarian problem, which we inherited from the British imperialism, that intensified further. Farmers started losing land. There is no successful land reform. That is the basic reason of the present agrarian crisis. Later on, the agrarian policies taken by subsequent governments, that is, in the heart of the policy, farmers and peasants were never in the center. The policy center around production, processing, export, import, hoarding, trade, around that, but not around farmers. And that is the basic flaw since independence in our agrarian policy. And that intensified, and it has been reduced. The problem have been reduced to, but developed to crisis. Now we are not facing agrarian problem. We are facing agrarian crisis. And this crisis is mm, manifested in different way. Now about more than 4 lakh farmers committed suicide. Every hour, 2 farmers are committing suicide. And every day, about 2,700 plus farmers are leaving agriculture because agriculture has become a loss-making venture. So in that situation, because of that, we say when we cannot solve any problem, we can solve a problem, but we cannot solve a crisis. Because of that difficulty, we are saying because of agrarian policy pursued by the bourgeois landlord government, agriculture in India facing the crisis. Now we are facing this land. Our land are under attack. Our price of the crops under attack. Our day-to-day life of the farmers are under attack, and massive poverty is there in this country for the rural population, because the failure of our land reform and failure of our agrarian development in the interest of the farming community and the people. So now we have seen BJP government, NDA government said this reform is discussed under discussion for many years, and these farmers are against reform. But we always made it clear we are not against reform. But reform for whom? We want reforms in the interest of the farmers, in the interest of the peasantry, agricultural workers, tenant peasants, and poorer section, agricultural workers. In favor of them, reform should be built up. But we are not in favor of reform in favor of the corporate houses, monopoly capitalist, exploiter. There is a difference that there we are not against reform, but the present reform is not against the farmers' interest and for the um, corporate houses. Because of that, we are opposing that. And what happened actually? In 2001, during NDA government, first the Shankarlal Guru Committee recommended that a first blueprint of market reforms for allowing private corporation to set up agricultural market. The first recommendation. And later on, in 2006 onwards, that another, under the BJP rule, another BJP leader, Santa Kumar, he headed a committee, and that committee recommended that most blatant recommendation to dismantle FCI and procurement system and gradually reduce the public distribution system. So these major recommendations, which are incorporated in these three black acts, those originated under the BJP government's rule. So they are only giving false propaganda to cover their misdeeds. That is there. Now the question of this act. When we all are under the under attack of pandemic, when we are locked under our house, there is a massive lockdown. At that period, in the darkness of in midnight darkness of 5th June, these three ordinances were promulgated. And these three ordinances were the actually later on it is enacted by the parliament illegally with the foul means. These three acts are the major question against which farmers are fighting. And that is the APMC Act that will destroy the marketing system, this minimum support price system, and farmers will not get the minimum support price, and that act is there. Then there is a contract trade farmers, that is trade act, and in that there also will be farmers will be the receiving it, and big traders and corporate will have the dominance. And third will be contract system in the act, that also will make the farmers, they force them to lose their land, and gradually they will become slave in their own land. These three acts we are there. And the electricity bill they have introduced to increase the electricity bill. But now farmers are using more and more electricity for pumping waters and all these things. That will increase the cost. And then these other and minimum support price are not getting. That is a major problem of farmers and major reason of agrarian prices. So these things are farmers are fighting for last several decades. But unfortunately, the government has not, they are not ready to solve the problem. They are taking that this three agricultural act, passed. The Farmers, Producers, Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020. That is one act. Essential Commodities Amendment Act 2020. And the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Service Act 20. This is called These three acts, that is, one is APMC Act, Bypass Act, one is Essential Commodity Act, one is Contract Farming. These three acts together, farmers in the day one started fighting against that. After the promulgation of these ordinances, in at least 10,000 places in the whole country, farmers burned the copies of those acts because farmers understood these three ordinances are the death knell for the farming community. Agricultural operation will be handed over to the corporate. In India, we have 80 crores farmers, and 86% of those farmers are small and marginal farmers. But these act, purpose of this act, the land will be taken from the farmers through the help of these three acts, and gradually it will be handed over to the corporate houses, Adani, Ambani, and other corporate houses, and that will create the problem for the farming community. Because India policy should be state country specific. In America, there are only a few lakh, 2 lakh or 2,50,000 farmers. But 100 corporates, how they have captured already about 75-80% of farming land. Richest man in America, that Bill Gates, he owned almost near 3 lakh acres of land. So all Amazon and all these big companies, they own land. They are trying to follow that policy. Indian corporates will take over and farmers will be replaced by based community agriculture will be replaced by corporate based agriculture. That is the basic intent and content of those three acts. Because of that, we are fighting, and farmers are fighting against that, and they all the false agreement argument the government given, we have countered. They said that now farmers are free to sell anywhere. As if earlier farmers are not free to sell there. Where they are selling? In country, only there are two states, Punjab and Haryana, where there is that is mandi system is there, and where APMC Act is there implemented fully. Only their farmers get the minimum support price. Only 6% of the product's cost is under this minimum support price, and 94% of those farm price is outside the free market, and traders are purchasing where there is no minimum support price. So if such a huge number of farmers do not get minimum support price, so what is the point of maintaining this act? We want the minimum support price should be ensured for our entire farming community. All farmers should get it. So now they are fully going to the largest number of the farmers going to the free market, and they are and now government saying they are not free. Government by through this act they are making farmers free. This is totally false propaganda. Then say that now farmers will have to go for bargaining with the corporate house. Can the poorer section of the farmers, they can go for equal term, bargaining on equal term with
Um,
farmers?
so, yeah.
They always these farmers, they are in the receiving end. They cannot compete with this Adani and Ambani in equal term in the contract farming. And the deregulation of trades and companies without oversight. There will be no government control. Absolutely freedom for the corporate houses. How these corporate poor farmers can compete with this company without government support? That is also there. Then all the restriction on the traders and agribusiness will be gradually it will be reduced and withdrawn. So because of that, these three acts are very dangerous for the existence of the farming community, and because of that, we are fighting against that. And government now has a provision for market intervention. When there is a price fall, government can intervene and purchase from the farmers. Then gradually government will withdraw. And if there is a price fall, there will be no government intervention. The farmers will be thrown out to the uh, mercy of the market totally. So these type of things in this that APMC by that bypass act and essential commodity act. Essential Commodity Act to ensure the purchase from the farmers with MSP, store it in the FCI godown, and distribute through the public distribution system. But this Santa Committee recommended to abolish the system. And yesterday, day before yesterday, the Niti Aayog announced that in 60% of the beneficiaries of the rationing system will be gradually reduced in the town area, and 40% of the beneficiaries will be reduced in the rural area. They have announced there for yesterday that they are traveling towards that end, that gradually public distribution system will be abolished. And already, massive malnutrition is there, starvation is there, all things we know. But after implementing this act, it will intensify further. So, and then hoarding, there is a limit of hoarding in old act of essential commodity, because small holders are hoarding now. But now Adani and Ambani, they will go to hoard. So lakhs and lakhs and tons of food grains they can hoard. So FCI go down will be abolished. Gradually, hoarding will be done by the corporate houses, and they will control the prices. There will be no competition actually. The few big player will be there in controlling and selling their products in the market. So that APA, that Essential Commodity Act, that danger is there. We are opposing that. And this contract system farming agreement also, this uh, and this unregulated storage also. Now there's at least some regulation on the storage, but after this act there will be no regulation on the storage. So big player will store enormously and have a monopoly control over the market, and consumer will be suffer. So we are fighting for the farmers interest. We are fighting for the agricultural workers to protect their other workers, for the protect their essential commodity, that so that um, that is the rationing system are not dismantled. And also we are fighting for the Manrega and rural unemployment of the agricultural workers, that are also there. So because of that, these um, mm, and state government had certain role, and these acts are not in the constitution. These acts are and goes to the state list, but government cannot pass it. Central government earlier sent 3 model bill to the states to take some action on that. But after that, without waiting for that, government themselves pass this act, and they have taken a route of market trade, agricultural trade entry. That route they have followed, but actually these are the rights of the state government which are being bypassed. That is also they want to unitary system they want to establish in many aspects. Here also it is implementation of the unitary policy of our constitutional arrangement. That is also there. So these things we are fighting against. Governments time we think that we have to fight. Otherwise the farmers, they will be in great jeopardy. And farmers understood it. Because of that, from June onwards, we farmers organization, we are appealing the government that listen to us, talk to us, don't impose this act on us. It will destroy the farmers of our country. So, but the government did not talk. Say 3 months they didn't talk. Then in September, Parliament, they tried to make it act, the ordinance. Then also we appealed to the government. We wrote hundreds and hundreds of email to the Prime Minister, Agriculture Minister, President, that listen to the farmer. Before passing it, listen to the farmer. Government didn't agree, then listen. Then they force it in the parliament. You know how it was passed in the Lok Sabha by brute majority and Rajya Sabha by hooliganism. With the help of marshal, MPs are not allowed to speak. Their voting rights are snagged. They are beaten. Three MPs were wounded, and then they are expelled from the house. Voting, without violating all the parliamentary norms, they passed it. So it is illegal, illegitimate act. So, and not only black act anti-farmers, but also it is illegal and illegitimate. So because of that, farmers are fighting. After that, also we told, you have passed that act, at least before making rules, talk to us. But government did not agree. Then when government or all our effort for 7 months failed, then we farmers, we decided to fight against that. We said, in a democracy, a elected government always listen to the people. This is the basic of democracy. But this government is fascistic. They don't bother about people's voice. They do not bother about people's difficulties. So they want to impose their idea on the farmers in the interest of the corporate houses. So because of that, we started the fighting. And then we said, uh, protest has no meaning before a fascistic government. We have to go for resistance. So we took the battle to the level of resistance. And that we started, we went for jail bharo, and more than 600 districts, lakhs and lakhs of farmers went to the jail. Because government and media propagating that it is Punjab movement. It is only Punjab. That is totally false. To give a, make it a sectarian propaganda that it is Punjab movement. It is not, but it is absolutely false. It is all India movement. But movement, expression of the movement differs in Kisan movement in different way. Where is immediate attack is there, Punjab and Haryana, Western UP, one form of resistance. When the attack will come tomorrow, there also resistance is coming in different way, dharna, rally, protest, and where a longer period will take to come, then also resistance will be in different way. But all India strike was there, general strike twice. 30, 35, 40 crores farmers participated. Punjab, Haryana farmers went there, in Kerala, in Bihar, and Maharashtra to organize Bandh. But farmers from all over the state, they organize the protest. Lakhs of people are in the state. There's a rail roko. About 600 places there are a rail roko I organized, because we organize this movement to draw the attention of the government on the one hand. They even not listening to us. This is our death warrant. We have to resist it. You listen to us. This is our voice through this movement. And also we tell the people also that we are Annadata, because we are producing, you are surviving. If we do not produce, you cannot survive. So because of that, we are fighting. That message also we want to give to the people that we are Annadata. So we are dying. Now stand by us, listen to our problem, try to understand our problem, and that way. And we are getting massive support. All the central trade union, workers of the country, they extended their support. Middle class, student, youth, women, traders, all sections of the society, they understood that these acts are against farmers, against people, against consumers, against common people. Because of that, we are getting more and more support. But we have to continue the movement further, strengthen the movement further, and the basic feature of this movement you have to understand. This is the largest or biggest Kisan movement since independence. Never after independence such a huge, widespread Kisan movement was there. This is the largest Kisan movement in the country's history. Secondly, it is most united struggle of the farmers. 500 organizations, that All India Kisan Sabha, we started the movement. Then All India Kisan Sangharsh Samanvay Samiti, then another broader platform that was took over. And later on, many more organizations joined, and we formed a Sangyukta Kisan Morcha. About 500 organizations we are together. We are fighting for last 3.5 months. That is no single difference. In any movement, you say within a week there is a difference cropped up. But farmers movement is so united, such a huge number and such a huge unity we have not seen in the past in any democratic movement. That's second feature. And third feature is the most peaceful movement. Not a single leaf have been torn. Huge lakhs and lakhs farmers are continuing. There is no violence. Our slogan was there: if the movement is peaceful, farmers will win. If there is a violence, Modi will win. With this slogan, massively farmers are convinced, and they are continuing. They are dying in three in this dharna around Delhi. Up to yesterday, about 247 farmers died. We sat in 0 degree temperature, raining. Such a severe situation farmers are facing. But still, they say, we will not go back without getting our demand. I realize this is the determination of the farmer. We never seen in the history that such a huge number of people shown such a determination and fight for their rights. So these are the things this movement is going on. Now, further, this movement will continue, and we have government is not listening to us. It is a totally anti-people, anti-farmers government. Since independence, I think this is the most anti-farmers government in the country. They are only propagating all falsehood. They say they are paying the minimum support price. That is false, 100% false. Modi said MSP was there, will be there, and it minimum support price था रहेगा ये सब बोल रहे. This is totally false. Minimum support price are paid only on 6% price of the products. 94%.
Comrade Hannan,
Yes,
okay,
now.
you can. I would just request you to wrap in maybe 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yes. So these things are there. Because of that, the government is anti-farmers policy they want to impose. 11 round talks was there, no result. We are repealing the act in the demands of the farmers. All 80 crores farmers demand, but government is trying to impose their amendment, keeping the basic exploitative character of those acts intact. Here is the difference going on. So we know if the government does not accept our demand, our movement will continue. A peaceful movement we have to continue. We know our difficulty. We do not know how many of our comrades have to sacrifice, how many people we have to die. But we know that we will continue this movement with the support of the democratic people of our country. And with that struggle, I hope our struggle will win. This is the determination of the farming community in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that in such a short time to explain all the acts and the core demands of the farmers, and also how it has how the protests have developed over these 3 months, and even before that since June. And what we are seeing is actually unprecedented in many terms. So now I would like to invite Dr. Chris to speak again about 30 minutes for your intervention, and then we'll go to the question answers.
Great, thank you. So hello everyone, and I just wanted to start by extending my thanks to Punya, to Ramadas, and the other members of the organizing committee for putting this event together, members of the Progressive Students Forum. It's a real honor to be here. Thanks to Ranjani for chairing, and a pleasure also to be joining Comrade Hanan Molla in this discussion. It was really great to listen to him speak and to learn about obviously these massive events that are happening at the moment. So I was asked to speak about Bhagat Singh's relevance for social movements in post-colonial India, and I do so as a historian, as someone who is speaking to you from London, so very much at a distance from some of the different struggles that are unfolding in India today, but someone who is very much interested in the power of the past to disrupt the present. Right? To shape alternative imaginations of what could be, to guide us towards other possible futures. So I want to organize my contribution today around the concept of inheritance, and specifically what I talk about in my writing as Bhagat Singh's revolutionary inheritance. And by focusing on this concept of inheritance, I want to demonstrate that Bhagat Singh's struggle and sacrifice cannot be easily contained in the past as something that happened a long time ago, indeed nearly a century ago, a time we have long left behind, but rather that his struggle and his sacrifice continues to place a demand on the present, that those who see themselves as Bhagat Singh's inheritors recognize that he has left them with a task, that there is a responsibility to Bhagat Singh to take up his fight. And I think Comrade Hanan made some of this clear in his opening statements about the legacy that Bhagat Singh has left for new generations in India. So when we think about commemorating Bhagat Singh, as we do today, it is not to do so simply as some honored ancestor from another time who we celebrate warmly, sentimentally, but as a comrade in a struggle that continues, as someone who continues to speak to us. And this is why my title mentions this notion of unfinished business, the unfinished business of anti-colonial revolution. And so you will all know that Bhagat Singh was executed by the British colonial state in 1931 at the age of 23 on the particular charge of conspiring to wage war against the King Emperor. He was involved in the assassination of a police officer in Lahore in 1928 and the bombing of the Legislative Assembly in New Delhi in 1929, the very heart of colonial government. These were actions that emerged from the planning and organization of an underground revolutionary organization, the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association. And Bhagat Singh's story belongs to a historical moment in which anti-colonialism had acquired the character of a mass movement in India, one that was openly breaking colonial laws and which, under the influence of Gandhi, became deeply colored or invested in an ethic of self-sacrifice in the service of freedom or Swaraj. But so too did Bhagat Singh's life unfold under the world shadow cast by Lenin and the success of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which became, for many in the sort of nascent Indian student movements, the signal, of a new age dawning. So as a historian, my interest in writing about Bhagat Singh and researching him went beyond simply reconstructing his intellectual biography, the biography of one man. I also wanted to engage the revolutionary's life, but also his death and his afterlives as a way to raise questions about memories of violence, about the relationship between democracy and dissent, and importantly, the continuing power and promise of anti-colonial histories in an ostensibly post-colonial world. Right? I think this is, again, something that is very much in line with what the questions that the organizing committee were asking today, and what does this history mean for us in post-colonial India? So as Ranjani suggested earlier, I began this research as a PhD student just over a decade ago, and I had two connected objectives. The first related to existing histories of anti-colonial revolutionary figures in India, and of Bhagat Singh in particular. There has been a great amount of scholarly work that has gone into showing the diverse modes of opposition to British imperialism in the 20th century. These have demonstrated not only that mainstream narratives of Congress party leadership and Gandhian nonviolence were shadowed throughout by histories of revolutionary violence, by histories of working class and peasant struggle, by student organization, and so on, but also that the mainstream nationalist movement or mainstream nationalist organizations and leaders worked often to contain those radical energies. Right? And in spite of these strategies of containment, anti-colonial rebel figures like Bhagat Singh remain widely celebrated in popular memory and in a variety of ways, though often centering qualities of courage, of heroism, of violent confrontation, tales that foreground a kind of very masculine performance of defiance and strength. And as Comrade Hanan mentioned, Bhagat Singh's political career was very brief, right? He was executed at 23 years of age. But this brevity of his career contrasts sharply with his extraordinary popularity across the political spectrum in India today and also elsewhere. Dislocated from those partisan politics of interwar India, he stands in the 21st century as an icon of self-sacrifice, of youthful vigor, an injunction to stand against tyrants, to never back down, to never surrender. So he is routinely invoked, and this across the political spectrum, from the revolutionary left to the far right, from the army in India to pacifists in Pakistan, from environmentalist youth groups to Khalistani secessionists. There are memorial sites dedicated to Bhagat Singh across the country, from small painted concrete statues on rural village roundabouts to the massive bronze figure stationed outside the Lok Sabha in New Delhi, which was, of course, the very building which he bombed in 1929. And I'm sure many of you will have, many of those listening to this lecture, watching this lecture, will have experienced these sorts of memorial sites in different ways across the country. So my research, rather than trying to unpick the sort of myths and legends that have calcified around Bhagat Singh, to try and uncover the real, the actual Bhagat Singh, my research instead has been primarily about the romance that has developed around the revolutionary. I was interested in what his widespread and indeed ideologically promiscuous or ideologically mixed popularity might tell us about the enduring appeal of self-sacrificing, uncompromising politics in the 21st century, as well as the public life of history and anti-colonial histories more generally. And as I put it in the book that I wrote about this, I've been interested in the promise Bhagat Singh represents, the promise he represents, rather than the kind of particular content of any program that he authored or that the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association organized around, though of course his surviving writings have been extremely useful and incisive for those who are trying to kind of think about his legacy and his lessons for the present. And we can maybe talk about this in the discussion. So that was the first objective of my research, to think about not just who the real factual Bhagat Singh was, but to think about the reasons why his figure has this sort of this aura, this kind of romance around him. The second and related objective of my interest in Bhagat Singh was to think critically about how we understand the relationship between history and politics in the present, in our contemporary moment. And this for me is less a question of what lessons can we draw from the struggles of the past, but rather, as I suggested earlier, this idea that struggles from the past continue to make a demand on those who are fighting in the present, right? So what is our responsibility to those who fought before? How do we think about the present and the challenges we face in the present with and through them, right? And this for me is about taking afterlives seriously, afterlives in politics. And I find it useful to distinguish between two different ways of approaching afterlives in politics. First, we can think about the way in which politicians or other figures willfully appropriate the dead, the kind of heroic dead from the past. They appropriate them as symbols for political disputes or arguments in the present, right? The second and more provocative possibility is that these dead heroes, these dead revolutionaries, might themselves conjure politics, by which I mean they might weigh down on the minds of the living, right? Calling them to responsibility, inciting action, right? And this is the difference between thinking about a history of reception, so how a figure is received by the living, and acknowledging the possibility of a haunting, right? Haunting. And by haunting, I don't mean that we are admitting that that ghosts actually exist, right? I mean it more in that sort of very kind of originary Marxist notion of a kind of specter is haunting Europe, right? The specter of communism. What I'm using, how I'm using it here and thinking about Bhagat Singh is to signal an experience of our contemporary moment that departs from the rules of historical or historicist time. This idea that we kind of move in a linear fashion between past, present, and future, and instead think about experiences of repetition, of recurrence, of return. So in this sense, Bhagat Singh is not some sort of passive symbol willfully appropriated by the living, but he appears time and time again as an effective and demanding interlocutor nearly 90 years after his death. He is effective because his ideas are still seen to be relevant to the struggles of today. And he is demanding because those of us who celebrate him often experience his presence or his memory as a call to responsibility, as an active sense of debt, of owing something to him, right? Why might we think this? Because his revolution is seen to be unfinished, right? The freedom that he fought and died for has been seen to be compromised or betrayed or dishonored. And this is why I'm drawn to this concept of inheritance. I understand inheritance not simply as a logic of succession, of kind of who comes after, but as an untimely interference, a sense of responsibility to those who are not present, who are no longer living, who don't exist in a kind of physical sense. And the question for me as a scholar is, how do we think that this sense of debt or responsibility conditions or changes our ideas of what is possible in politics in a contemporary moment? Does it change how we think about politics? And if it does, how then do we need to think about commemorating or celebrating figures like Bhagat Singh? So this is a general question, I think, about revolutionary afterlives, in a broad sense. But there is also a particularity to this example. Right? Bhagat Singh's effectiveness as a sort of instigator, a specter in politics today, is in many ways related to the nature of his death. Right, this fabled heroic kissing of the hangman's noose on 23rd March 1931. As I mentioned, Bhagat Singh was executed by British colonial authorities in Lahore, which was then capital of undivided Punjab. His hanging came at the end of a protracted, high-profile court case, the Lahore conspiracy case, the second one, as Comrade Hanan Mullah mentioned. The first was involved with the kind of Ghadar rebels, the Ghadaris who came back from the west coast of the United States and Canada during the First World War to try and instigate a rebellion. Kartar Singh Saraba was the figure mentioned here. But this was the second Lahore conspiracy case, and it was Bhagat Singh's continued defiance of the authority of the court that catapulted him onto the nationalist stage. In the first place, the young revolutionary owned up completely to what he had done. Right? He never contested the charges against him. But what he did contest was the court's claim to represent justice. He used the trial, he and his comrades, I should mention, used the trial as a stage to make speeches, to shout slogans, to denounce British rule, and so on, actions eagerly recorded and reported on by the observant press. And this was importantly a confident, swaggering performance. Bhagat Singh is described in newspaper accounts of the time as twisting his mustache defiantly in front of the judge, right? Of getting into fights with prison guards, of remaining totally uncowed, unintimidated by the threat of state violence. And indeed, when his death sentence was announced, Bhagat Singh thanked the judge for the opportunity to prove his commitment to his revolutionary ideas. And his hanging in Lahore Central Jail provides very much the kind of centerpiece for my book. And I wanted to read briefly from it now because I think it's kind of relevant to the discussions. Shouts emerged from jail, reported the Lahore Tribune following the events of 23rd March 1931. Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev executed. The government's attempt to avoid a public spectacle around the controversial hanging, shrouded under a thick veil of secrecy, censored by prison walls, and carried out ahead of the scheduled date, was subverted, it seems, by a loud noise heard from outside the jail compound. Not a disconsolate howl of suffering, but one final shout of defiance. Inqilab Zindabad, the prisoner's last testament, delivered from the stage of the gallows. The prison walls reverberated with the slogan, suggests Gopal Thakur in his retelling. The musician and scholar Madan Gopal Singh recalls a story passed down by his father, the poet Harbhajan Singh, describing the family's ancestral village of Itra on the night of the hanging. So Itra today is a very kind of congested part of Lahore, a very built up area. But at this point, it was just a kind of a village. It was the closest habitation to Lahore Central Jail. And like most of the district, the village was agog with excitement, as he puts it, on 23rd March, charged with rumors of an impending execution. After the fall of darkness, the tension was broken by distant, echoing shouts of Inqilab Zindabad. Groups of villagers gathered on rooftops in stunned silence before beginning steadily to return the slogan into the night. Inqilab Zindabad, Inqilab Zindabad. Madan Gopal Singh imagines this scene, and here I'll quote from him directly. Their sound is picked up by the inmates of the jail and reciprocated. The atmosphere now becomes fully charged. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs rise as one primal sound, and the night is torn asunder. This impassioned expression of solidarity between the prison mates and the villagers continues late into the night. Not a lamp is lit anywhere in the vicinity, whereas the distant jail seems to burn like an island of light. So in this telling, the resolve of Bhagat Singh and his comrades in the face of death is contagious. Their final shouts cascade, they spark a rising chorus. This death is not to be greeted with mournful silence. It demands a response, the escalation of a fight. So the central premise of my work then is that Bhagat Singh is not some kind of figure from the past, a figure from another time, but someone who continues to haunt the present as a sense of potential unfulfilled, of paths not taken, of a revolution unfinished. Bhagat Singh's eventful afterlife is further enabled because the revolutionary was not just an anti-colonial figure. He was not just an Indian nationalist, but he was a revolutionary, a critic of the state. And this is important because it facilitates an ambivalent relationship to that moment of Indian independence in 1947. This year, the transition from colonial to post-colonial rule is commonly seen as the end of one historical sequence, right? And the beginning of another. But we know from history that this was also a moment of uncertainty, of unfinished business, and that there has been debate around this transformation, the nature of the freedom achieved, and a keen awareness that certain inequalities, certain forms of exploitation, certain approaches to statecraft and state violence were carried over from the colonial period into post-colonial politics and society. And this is perhaps clearly articulated in that early Communist Party of India slogan, "Ye Azadi Jhuti hai," right? This freedom is a lie. The point I'm making is this, that if 1947 did not establish the future that Bhagat Singh fought and died for, then we can say that his call to responsibility still has force in post-colonial India, right? This is that he's kind of remains as a sort of ghostly comrade in a fight that continues, in a situation of unfinished business. So in my writing, thinking about this debate, this anxiety over the nature of India's Azadi, the kind of question of the nation states, the Indian nation states, compromises, the paths it has chosen, the form it takes. There is this lingering question of, Is this what our anti-colonial heroes really died for? Is this the future that they wanted? Right? And I've been interested in kind of two different responses to these sort of spectral presences from the past, of which Bhagat Singh is one among many, right? We can talk about others. One is the way in which individuals or institutions seek to contain Bhagat Singh's disruptive spirit, trying to attach him to one particular political project, one particular political party, one particular idea of what the Indian nation is or what it should be. And this can be pursued via the writing of official histories, the building of statues, how he's depicted in films, and so on, the ways in which there's a claim made on who Bhagat Singh really was. And the second response is that of escalation, that those who respond to Bhagat Singh's demand, his call to responsibility, by joining in the struggles of the present. Right? These are the responses that affirm a responsibility to the revolution that is kind of stranded halfway. Now, the problem for those of us who are interested in a radical or progressive politics and the potential of revolutionary histories is that figures in this category are not always progressive, right? And that Bhagat Singh's spectral affiliations, his alliances, can be seen, with the Hindutva right, with a sort of muscular nationalism, with a sort of gun-toting vigilantism, the way that he's being celebrated in other contexts, very much a contrast to that of the progressive revolutionary left, and especially their focus on his ideas. Right? So in my book, I discuss left student movements and their kind of engagements with Bhagat Singh. But I also think about how he has been celebrated by Hindutva organizations, by Khalistani groups, especially in the 1980s and 90s, but also into the 2000s, who experienced this sort of call to responsibility in a different way. So battles over history, and I'll kind of move to conclude here. Battles over history are, of course, battles over the present. And the German theorist and philosopher Walter Benjamin famously wrote about the historian who can fan a spark of hope in the past. But this historian must recognize that, quote, even the dead will not be safe from the enemy if he wins. Even the dead will not be safe from the enemy if he wins. This is a serious warning, I think, that is worth thinking about in the context of a global shift towards the right, which involves as a central part of its platform the rewriting of history in a variety of contexts, including in my own context where I'm living in the UK. But speaking of India and the enduring power of anti-colonial histories, I would also like to kind of flip or invert Benjamin's phrase to say that even the enemy, if he wins, will not be safe from the dead. Even the enemy, if he wins, will not be safe from the dead. And this is the lesson that figures like Bhagat Singh present to us, that escaping these sort of attempts to contain their presence, to exercise their radical potential, they continue to haunt today's politics to remind us that things can and should be different. And as scholars and activists commemorating Bhagat Singh, we can think about our responsibility to the revolutionary dead. If Bhagat Singh calls on us to recognize the inequities of the present, the survival and even escalation of many of those problems that he fought against in the 1920s, how do we respond? Do we evade it? Do we avoid it? Or do we affirm it, right? Do we affirm that responsibility? And I think events like today are a chance to recognize Bhagat Singh's call to responsibility, his inheritance for contemporary struggles and movements. And for me, speaking personally, this involves first affirming the internationalism that characterized Bhagat Singh's thought, to resist the kind of containment of our bodies and our imaginations within nation-state borders. Second, by challenging those monuments built by power, their kind of solid forms, and affirming instead the potential of the crowd, the popular assembly, the street, and its democratic, horizontal, collaborative energies. And I think there's plenty of evidence of this in India today. It's already been mentioned about the farmers' protests, of course, which have been truly kind of inspiring occupations of public space. But also looking back to last year and Shaheen Bagh, we see figures like Bhagat Singh decorating these sorts of assemblies and processions and images and speeches, right? And then third and finally, For me, thinking with Bhagat Singh means recognizing that even when whatever current fight ends, when laws are dropped or policies reversed or politicians changed, that there still will be many more fights to follow, so that we must remain ready, we must remain vigilant, we must remain supportive of our comrades, of each other. And this is the message, I think, of the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association slogan, Inqilab Zindabad, right? Long live revolution, a life for revolution, a life of revolution, a struggle that must continue. I'll finish there, but thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that very interesting take on Bhagat Singh. And I think the place that you ended is where what we have been witnessing in India about appropriation of these figures, not just Bhagat Singh, but many more by the right. And but we are also seeing, as you just mentioned correctly, since last year through our protests on the Anti-Citizenship Act or the farm protests, that how there has been again a reversal of bringing back the revolutionary side of these historical icons and revolutionary icons. So with that, I think we can go to the question answers, and there are a few questions. I would ask somebody who's been monitoring these questions to just put them here. They can just switch on their mic and ask them. Gautam, you have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you, Gautam. We still can't hear you. We can't hear you. We can't. Is there anybody else?
Okay,
yeah, now. Yeah, Ramdas, you can. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll ask the first question. So we have been taking questions from all the platforms together. So I'll go to the first question. The question is from Mrinal. So how would you look at the students' participation in farmers' protest and how they must engage in some movements, keeping in view the politics exposed by Bhagat Singh? It's a question to Hanan Malla.
The students, always.
Comrade, can you turn on your video?
Students always in the forefront of all democratic struggle against imperialism, struggle against exploitation, and struggle for the rights, always. As the farmers of the country in the forefront of the biggest farmer struggle and a part of biggest democratic struggle in the country, and the issues involved in their struggle is the defending the interest of various sections of our people, especially the exploiting section. The students always took interest in such struggle. In the past, we have seen many glorious struggle of students of their own, and any other democratic struggle we have seen in defense of people's rights, in defense of secularism, in defense of democracy. And all these struggles, students are always in the forefront. So now we think students are also taking their role. Now students organizations are raising, explaining, because they are the pioneer to explain the issue before the people always. So This, what are the three acts, what are the difficulties, why the problem, why the governments are not accepting. All these issues are being explained by a section of the students. Already they are taking place. The problem is because of pandemic, schools, colleges are closed. They could not come in a large number in taking up the matter, and they also that is that. But now gradually they are coming in the street. They are coming in support of the farmers movement, participate in rallies, protest program, strike, bandh, everywhere they are coming in more and more. I think in coming days, students will play their democratic and historical role in advancing the farmers movement in that.
Should we go to the next question? So this is a question to Chris. The question asked by Aisha. So what differences you could see in the deterrence of youth against establishment in colonial period and post-colonial period? So how do you look at it?
The difference between youth in the colonial period versus the post-colonial period in there. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a very big question, I think. And I'm sure a lot of people who we find kind of focused examples of movements to compare might give up different results. But I think that actually I would probably agree with what Comrade Hanan has said about this there is a way in which student movements and youth movements, because of the nature of the your kind of the generational possibilities of being able to invest yourself in a struggle, to kind of to be kind of not beholden by some of the responsibilities that some of your older comrades may face in different ways. There is this kind of way in which students and youth in India have been at the forefront of a lot of these struggles, have been able to invest themselves, and that is true, I would say, in the colonial period into the post-colonial period. And actually, as someone who's been interested in a lot of contemporary student movements in India, I think the ways in which a lot of organizations seek to, even if they are founded after independence, even if they are founded as something as recently, as the 80s or 90s, they still draw a connection to some of the earlier student organizations that are kind of draw on a sort of notion of inheritance or legacy of some of these anti-colonial student movements, and try and learn from them. One thing that I would say is there is a kind of critique, right, of some of the student movements for that kind of tendency, as Comrade has mentioned, of kind of focusing on explaining politics to common people. And I think one of the things that I've admired about some of the recent student movements in India is the way in which they are not only just explaining and translating ideas and strategies, but also learning from people and seeking to build connections outside of just the student movement itself, right? So building kind of alliances with other community organizations, of learning from workers and learning from peasants in different ways. And we see this in a number of places across India and in South Asia. So I would say that's kind of encouraging thing about the current moment, that maybe in the anti-colonial period is more siloed into student organizations against other organizations. But again, I would love to hear from some of the people who are on this call who are also invested in these organizations at a ground level, right? For instance, Ranjani, I don't even know, do you have any thoughts on that question? I'd love to hear someone who's been involved in these forums.
Yeah, I mean, one has to go and study better in terms of what the history of student movement was in the anti-colonial period. But one of the things that I feel is that the anti-colonial or the anti-imperialist stream of the movement was very strong. That was kind of the common ground in the anti-colonial period. Versus what happened in the post-independence period, where, as you just mentioned in your talk about the different paths that could have been taken and which were taken in post-independent India, is where the differences came along the way, where ideology also became very important, which led these paths. So that is where the differences in the student movement, in the streams of student movement also came along. And I think it can be studied through how the policies were taken by the post-colonial state in India, the educational policies. And since the time I have been active in student politics, we have seen a tumultuous time in terms of the new policies coming in and the kind of attacks on higher education. And we have seen how that had and still is galvanizing the student community. And I feel the farmers' protest, as Comrade Hannan was pointing out, is somewhat a point where it has now become like a mass movement. So therefore, the students who have been always the progressive and sections of the Indian peoples, they had means very very obviously an ally of the farmers in this fight. So I feel that because of that legacy of the students, of the student movement to stand for progressive politics and to find authority, which is which is the core of any student movement, is what is driving this farmers protest, and that is why the students are coming in support of the farmers movement. And I feel that that is probably the the streams of paths not taken and paths which were taken determined the history and success successes of students movement in the post colonial period. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Yes.
We can go to the next question.
All right, okay. So the next one comes from Jishnu, who's asking that taking into consideration the current brutal crackdowns by government on younger agitators and activists, it has become difficult for those to dissent. What message of Bhagat Singh would be suitable? I'm guessing this question sort of goes to both the speakers. So who wants to go first?
First I say, my reaction is that, those who are supporting the Kisan movement, either journalists or students or intellectuals or any academicians who are extending support to the Kisan movement, most of them are implicated in false cases, sedition charges, arrested, and all sorts of repression is going. So because of that, I think this government, a totally authoritarian government, that against the people's right to dissent. And right to dissent is the basic of democracy. And that is the capital for us, the right to dissent, to raise our demand, to fight for our rights. But the government, present BJP government, Narendra Modi, is the worst dictator this country has seen. Even Indira Gandhi will be proved child before him. So this attack on democracy and fascistic suppression of the people's right, democratic rights, I think this is coming. Because of that, those who are supporting, they are facing already young girls, that's Disha and others, how they are fighting. Come more and more. But by this such attack, they cannot check the rights of the people or the desire of the people to dissent. I think this movement will get more and more help from the people in spite of all this repression.
Shall I respond as well, Gautam?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'll just say briefly that I think one of the challenges for people today, so I mentioned about Bhagat Singh belonging to this moment in history after the 1917 revolution, right? When there seemed to be another way of organizing politics and society. on the horizon, right? That was tangible in world politics. That was something that was very obviously an alternative that people could aspire to, right? And Bhagat Singh and his comrades, we know, kind of celebrated this possibility of a new world and believed in the possibility of a new world as a way to brave the repression, to brave the kind of crackdowns that they faced. Now, one of the difficult things for today, and this is again a global predicament, is that it is very hard to imagine radical change, right? It is very hard to imagine the kind of end of capitalism in a way that might have seemed possible at the start of the 20th century, right? And so it becomes that kind of courage and bravery that's invested in the faith of a new world is not necessarily there, right? But I think that we need to, which is why I think, you know, what Comrade Hanan is saying is that this kind of need to believe in that possibility of change, to kind of resist the tyranny of the present and not just accept it, right? Not just to kind of give in to that that intimidation and that difficulty of imagining something different. Because by coming together, and this is why I think the movements, the mass movements are so exciting, because there is a new world being produced on those streets. There is a new world being produced, even temporarily, you know, at the sit-ins, at Shaheen Bagh, these sorts of things. We need to kind of hold on to that spirit of the collective, and as Comrade Hanan said, the kind of the people believing in this sort of justice, believing that a different world it needs to be happening. I think this is maybe, I mean, I don't want to put any, I kind of avoid putting words in Bhagat Singh's mouth and saying this is Bhagat Singh's message to the present. But I think that holding on to that kind of hope that things can be different is crucial for braving the challenges that we face.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Chris. The next is from Ashish, who wants to ask, in speaking of how the past informs the present, is it ever possible to have a realist overthrow of the imperial capitalist system? And how can we draw from Bhagat Singh's life to have new strategies for our times to achieve the same? I think this goes to Chris.
Could you just repeat, is it a realist political overthrow?
Yeah, realistic. I think what he means to say is that like a realistic overthrow of the imperial capitalist system. And what lessons can we draw from Bhagat
Singh? This kind of relates to what I was just saying, I think, in the sense that today, you know, in the kind of age of neoliberalism, it becomes increasingly difficult to imagine the end of capitalism, right? That kind of sense that this is on the horizon, which we saw in the early 20th century, is no longer really there, right? And for me, I think what we learned from Bhagat Singh is that a kind of properly revolutionary politics need not necessarily be only invested in the future, right? But is about how we handle the everyday, right? And how we kind of stand up to injustice in this kind of constant revolutionary stance, this Inqilab Zindabad, long live revolution every day, right? That if we can kind of operate on that sort of ethics of resistance and challenge and live that kind of vigorous ethical, moral approach to politics, that is kind of his message that will affect us in the present. I think, kind of rambling a little bit, what am I trying to say? But it is that sort of everyday, uncompromising commitment to revolution, rather than necessarily organizing around a particular vision of the future. But again, I am sure other people will have thoughts on this and may disagree with me there. But for me, what Bhagat Singh brings to politics today is that kind of sense of a constant vigilance, right? A constant sort of mode of resistance, which can be exhausting and demanding, but is what the kind of injustices of the present demand, right? So.
Right. Now, the next is from Amal, who's asking if Bhagat Singh had programs which went well beyond the anti-colonial struggle and were more of a long-term vision of the society, and which were those according to the speakers? I think it goes to both of the speakers. So, Comrade Malla, if you want to take it first.
No. Ask. Comrade Chris can reply.
Yes.
So there's all sorts of, and the previous speaker, Professor Chaman Lal, has written really well on this. Previous speaker of the of this memorial lecture, I think he was your first speaker, right? And people like Chaman Lal, people like Jagmohan Singh, who is Bhagat Singh's nephew, have spent a lot of years collecting his writings, right? And collecting his essays, which were not necessarily widely circulated when he was living. We know that his very famous essay, Why I'm an Atheist, was published after his death. And for me, that is kind of one of the most extraordinary pieces of writing that he did. But we know that he thought about, he has writings, about communalism, about caste. We know he has this powerful address to young political workers, which is again about what youth can give to the political struggle, right? And all of these raise questions that were not answered by the transfer of power in 1947, right? All of these raise questions that are still can be applied to the present in different ways, depending on how you read them and what you're reading them in reference to. So this goes back to one of those, early questions about what young people can do and what students can do, and that it is to kind of read and to study, right? And to know Bhagat Singh's ideas can help you then think differently about the present. I don't think he wasn't writing primarily about the departure of the British, right? He was writing about inequality in society. He was writing about exploitation. And these sorts of messages can be carried on. So I would really recommend Chaman Lal's Bhagat Singh Reader, which came out last year, is a very comprehensive collection of essays and letters and writings. You can find these writings in Hindi and Punjabi and Urdu and all sorts of languages. So I would really encourage people to read that.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I think the next one is also to you, and but this is much more focused on England. So this question is from Lakshmi, who's asking that the news of revival of the left movement in Britain was in news, and particularly the youth in Britain. What were the reasons of the same? And she goes on to say that she had read somewhere that it had something to do with the fees and social security and things like that. I mean, the role of youth in the resurgence of the left movement in Britain. I think that's what she's alluding to. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole longer story, I guess. So when I started doing my PhD, this was a time when the government tripled tuition fees, right? So they went from being around 3,000 a year to being 9,000 a year. And there were mass protests around this. There were occupations, there were marches. The Conservative Party headquarters was stormed by students. And there was a huge kind of awareness or protest around the marketization of higher education, right? The kind of turning of students into customers or consumers, right? Now, one of the things about this movement was it wasn't successful in reversing the tuition fee rises, right? They're still, it's still very expensive to go to university. They've even over the last years cut other forms of support for students. But the networks and organizations that were formed there went on to get involved in different sorts of organized politics over the 2010s, right? And a number of young people and students who were involved in those fees protests became essential to the kind of Jeremy Corbyn moment in the Labour Party, which, as many of you will know, was the kind of a now all too short period when the kind of left wing of the main opposition party took over the kind of took over the leadership. And we had a very kind of hopeful few years of young people's engagement in the Labour Party and organized electoral mobilization. But unfortunately, this, in 2019, we had this kind of crushing election where the Conservatives won a huge majority. And in fact, I think at the moment in England, there is a real sort of sense of crisis amongst the left, and to know, after Brexit, after the kind of Boris Johnson's Conservative win, about what is the place for the young generations in politics? What is the place of student movements in these kind of increasingly restrictive and profiteering universities, right? And so, while we had the kind of glimpse of an alternative, it's kind of the reactionary forces have come crushing down. But one thing maybe to note is kind of connected to what I was saying earlier about the importance of assemblies like Shaheen Bagh and the farmers' protests, even if they are, by their very nature of being protests and sit-ins, they are temporary, right? They will someday end. That those energies and those collaborations take new and organized forms after, right? So there's a lot of, in the same way that the student protests led to kind of reinvigoration of an old political party, the Labour Party. And I think that there are maybe some interesting, ways that we can think about the longer term effects of student organization in that way. I hope that answers the question in some way.
Yeah. The next is from Richa, who points out that it's not the guns and pistols that defines Bhagat Singh. He was an avid reader. Study reverberated in the corridors of his mind. He studied to enable himself with arguments in favor of his cult. With this weapon of realism became his cult. How important do you think it is to have the hunger to know before we jump into any revolutionary approach or action?
Comrade Hanan, do you want to?
No, you please.
This does relate to what we've been kind of saying earlier, that that one of the sort of responsibilities of students and young people is to not only learn from books and texts like Bhagat Singh is advocating, right? Reading his essays, reading the work of struggles in a global context, right? Thinking internationally as Bhagat Singh did. He was reading about Ireland, he was reading about Soviet Union, he was reading about other parts of the world, right? So it's not only learning from books, as you correctly say, Bhagat Singh is engaging there, but also I think learning from these sorts of political alliances and collaborations and meeting with other workers and peasants and other student organizations, right? Learning from dialogue, learning from speaking with each other, debating with each other. And this is something the revolutionaries were doing. Bhagat Singh wasn't simply in a library on his own reading these texts. He was debating them passionately, right? Even when they were in prison, they had reading groups and talked about key texts in the day, right? They learned from each other, they learned from others. And that is, as you say, like, you can see that in that quote or in the question, which is, I think, a quote from Why I'm an Atheist, right? Whereas I learn the kind of arguments in favor of your cult. This is what Bhagat Singh is saying. And it is very much about engaging in arguments with others, right? Defending your ideas. So when I think the question is maybe a false divide between whether we need to read before we jump into struggle. You learn through the struggle, and you learn what to read by partaking in those kind of struggles, right? So I think to think of them in dialogue is useful. Right.
Okay. The next question is to Comrade Hanan Mullah. It's on the present farmers movement, and the question goes as to if there are any plans to expand the farmers current movement into areas where they might not be as strong as we see in NCR, Punjab, the Western UP, and other areas. If yes, what kind of strategies are we looking at?
We discussed in SKM that this is though intensification of the movement is around the capital, and 5 states, Punjab, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan, are directly involved in it. But we divided the movement in two parts. Because of pandemic and lack of train, because farmers cannot come to the capital by aeroplane. So naturally, the movement was divided into two parts. In 5 states, where they came by road, and others they are planned here in Delhi, around Delhi. And other states, they are organizing struggle, strike, demonstration, dharna, and different explanatory meeting in their own state level or district level and block and lower level. Even village level panchayat also we told, because we need that conscious supporter. Emotionally, now people know that these 3 acts are bad, but a large number of people still do not know what is the actually, why it is bad, what is the problem. So that explanatory campaign is necessary. For that, we need that we help that, because media is totally against us. So through media, there is one of the source of information is not going to the people much. So, but students, intellectuals, and other people's teachers, they are also taking the matter to the students. Along with these 3 anti-farmers act, there is 4 labor code, the same danger for the working class. The 44 labor laws have been reduced into 4 codes, and it's called labor code, but actually it is company code. All the rights of the labor we achieved in 70 years, that was taken away, and all the opportunity is given to the companies in those 4 codes. They can close any factory anytime, and working hours can go up to 12 hours. Then union rights of the union can be controlled. All these things, anti-labor things were included in the labor code. So as these 3 acts are anti-farmers, equally these 4 codes are anti-workers. So both the producing class, workers and peasants are the producing class in the country, but both are under severe attack. And both at enemy is same, the government, and the danger are the same, their existence is in challenge. So if we can build up this unity of the workers and peasants and same type of problem, and we know the workers are taking our cause to the people in a better way than peasants are taking the workers issue to the people. Weaknesses we discussed, that weaknesses in the Kisan movement, because we Kisan had not much idea about the code and all things. So we have decided to have a joint movement, joint campaign, and take these dangerous trend of this uh, attack on workers and peasants to campaign all this. I think this preparation we going on. Now the Mahapanchayat. Second round we spread in the other part. We spread in different parts. Bharat Bandh was there. About 27 states, crores of farmers participated. Rail Roko was there in 600 places in all India that was organized. Now we are thinking that Mahapanchayat. In Mahapanchayat, a massive rally. Already our 2025 is there. Another 2025 in the pipeline. The central leaders are addressing, and states and districts are organized. Massive protest, 30,000, 50,000, even 1 lakh farmers and people are gathering. So this huge gathering will create enthusiasm among the farmers and workers, and threat, and the government will be also pressurized. So in these 2 way, those gatherings are helping. So in that way, we are taking program to the lower level in the whole India, and entire population of the workers and peasants should be gradually involved so that we can defeat these anti-people policies of the Narendra Modi government.
Okay. Thank you, Conrad. Uh, I think we'll end with the last 2 questions. This one's from Hitesh, who's asking Chris about how you elaborated about afterlife implications of a revolutionary. But the question is that, however, nowadays most of the movements are impromptu, without any concrete theoretical foundations, and more often issue-based. Hence, the question is about how to create the same impact and transcend the understanding and form a movement with concrete direction.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of debate around these sorts of questions in left theory and politics at the moment, and I think that you know, this is where, so there's two kind of things to what I'm arguing. One is that the example of anti-colonial struggles can sort of give us an alternative to the kind of predicaments of the present, right? That it can help us think differently about the present. So it has that disruptive potential, right? But we also have to recognize that we can't rely entirely on the kind of romance or nostalgia of those times. And as Ranjani has suggested, you know, there was a very clear opponent, right? There was a very clear British imperial presence that needed to be fought against, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily exist today. Some would argue maybe it does, and actually the kind of corporate political nexus that have been illuminated by the farmers' protests has been really useful, right, in engaging a sort of coherent, broad-ranging movement. But I recognize that the kind of frustration and the question is that, you know, a lot of things are issues-based. How is it to build kind of more broad-ranging oppositional politics? And I don't have an answer myself. I don't know if we can look entirely to Bhagat Singh for that, right? But there are all sorts of creative you know, initiatives around the world and thinking about how, you know, what are the ways in which we can come together, you know, against exploitative and extractive regimes, and a lot of, you know, interesting alliances with left-wing movements and environmentalist politics have been really important in a time of climate change and this sort of idea that this is something that is going to affect everyone, right? So that kind of challenge of coming up with an argument, a sort of coherent, inspiring argument that brings people together, is an, you know, an absolute challenge of left politics today. And if I had the answer, I would love to share with you how to bring people together, but unfortunately I don't. I think we can look to Bhagat Singh, maybe not necessarily for a specific answer, but for the kind of creativity with which one engages the present and thinks about how to connect people, right? And yeah, I'm sorry, that's kind of a unfinished answer, but that's the nature of it.
Okay, so this would be our last question because it's, you know, it's almost 9, and this is also to you, Chris. I mean, it's more of a historical question of how do we look at the duality of putting the historical figures in their context while using their ideas for the present? Is it okay to hold these figures accountable for the principles that we adhere today? I mean, that's a question from my side.
Yeah, yeah, I think, okay, personally, I mean, I don't think this can ever really be about this sort of uncritical reception of figures from the past, right? And I think that that's one of the reasons why I, you know, emphasize in my statement about a lot of Bhagat Singh's appeal is as a sort of charismatic masculine figure, right? As a kind of sort of, there is a kind of like very, you know, there's a very kind of, there's a very kind of gendered implication of the type of opposition that he manifests, right? And I think that there are also, there has been a long tradition of pointing out what the revolutionary movements in anti-colonial period missed. There has been a lot of you know, critiques of other revolutionary movements about their attention to questions of caste, right? And the kind of ways in which they interact with kind of Dalit movements. And I think that none of the sort of ways in which we engage these histories should be uncritical, right? And I think, in fact, one way to accept the legacy of Bhagat Singh or accept his inheritance is to have that kind of constant critique, right? That is part of what he is not receiving figures from his past uncritically either, right? He sees limitations in how different figures are commemorated or for what reasons they are used. And I think we must do the same. So I think the question captures an important point that we can learn from the past, but it's never, and we can also feel accountable or responsible to the past. But we also have kind of part of that kind of critical responsibility is to recognize what is demanded by our present and what is the most kind of effective way of responding to the challenges that we face that are very much of a contemporary moment. I hope that answers in some way.
Thank you.
Yeah. So should I? Okay, Gautam is muted. I just, because I've been told by the organizers that we are just at the fag end of this memorial lecture, which has been very lively and wonderful to hear both speakers. And I think we touched upon important issues from history to the contemporary. I think the point that where we ended at what Chris was talking about, to take cues from the past to study the contemporary more critically and the paths not taken. While I was also talking about the students' movement in the pre-colonial, during the colonial regime also was guided by these different streams of ideas of India. And Bhagat Singh was one such idea of India that kind of galvanized a lot of galvanized the youth and a large section to fight for an India which is more equal and equitable, and which still continues in the present struggles that we see. So I would just ask the speakers if they have some final words, maybe, and then I will call upon Karishma to just give the vote of thanks. So Chris, if you have your final comments.
No, I feel like I've said everything I wanted to, but just to thank you again for this opportunity and for the opportunity to hear your question, to listen to Comrade Hanan Mullah, and yeah, thank you all. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Comrade Hanan, final comments from you?
Final comments, this is a very, very important and very valuable program for our younger generation, and how we can link the history with the current situation. These are the issues raised there, and we tried to connect both ends and to reach certain conclusion. I think for that, such an important discussion you arranged. I again thank the organizing committee, and we hope in future they will organize more educative and analytical programs for the posterity in coming days. With these words, I thank you all, including the chairperson.
Thank you so much. Just before giving it to Karishma, one point I just want to touch is that I think from all of this, that what we gathered is through the talks about appropriating symbols of icons of figures from history in the present context that we see is much to do about their politics. So a lot of there is a lot of importance and relevance of studying Bhagat Singh himself, his writings and his thoughts. So I think that is one of the messages that this memorial lecture, the third edition, including this third edition, has been trying to give, that we should keep on reading, understanding, and agitating on issues that Bhagat Singh touched upon. So with this, I call upon Karishma to, I hand it over to Karishma. Yes.
Thank you, Ranjini. So first of all, I'm really honored to propose the vote of thanks for this memorable event. So that was also a great learning experience for me. I'm sure all of us in attendance benefited from the insights shared by the speakers, which has also reaffirmed our faith in the political vision of Bhagat Singh. So We had a remarkable panel of speakers for the evening. I thank Dr. Chris Moffat, lecturer at the Queen Mary University of London and well known for his works on the post-colonial spectres of Bhagat Singh, for sharing his valuable academic insights. I would like to extend our gratitude to Comrade Hanan Mullah, National General Secretary of All India Kisan Sabha and Coordination Committee member of the Samyukt Kisan Morcha for taking time out to share his views on how Bhagat Singh's political ideas remain intertwined with the farmers' movements. Also, extending my heartfelt thanks to all the well-wishers, like-minded people, subcommittee conveners, members of the organizing committee, numerous volunteers and former volunteers without whose commitment this event would not have been materialized. Also, I would like to thank the admin panel of the Facebook pages like Pune Collective, Hyderabad Collective, Anveshan, Chindabar IIT Madras, Indie Journal, Critical Edges Magazine, Govind Pansare, PSO TIS Hyderabad, Comrade, and Progressive Students Forum for coordinating with us and sharing the event on their FB pages. So, last but not the least, I thank all of you in attendance who joined us today with the hope of learning something new with a view to make this world a better place. I take leave with an inspiring quote by Bhagat Singh. People get accustomed to, to the established order of things and tremble at the idea of change. It is the lethargic spirit that needs to be replaced by the revolutionary spirit. Inquilab Zindabad.